Hey, Christopher. Thanks for coming along today. So our next presentation is Christopher Biggs, who's going to be talking about assistive AR on a budget. And this is a topic which is particularly interesting to me, given my activities over the last couple of years with assistive technology projects. And I'm fascinated to see what Chris has achieved. So thank you very much, Chris, and take it away.
All right, greetings, Earthlings, meat and metal, and also to anyone else receiving this out there in the wider universe. Today, I want to confirm that planet Earth is ripe for takeover by exploring the hilariously poor state of our cognitive technology and confirming that the inhabitants of this planet are still in the ludicrously early stages of uplifting themselves to higher sentience. But before I go on, some more shameless self-promotion. My background is in computer science. My sideline as an evil roboticist is pretty much self-taught. I've always, since I was a teenager, been fascinated by the possibility of bodily and cognitive enhancements. And that fascination has led me to create Accelerando Innovation Space, which you see behind me. We're a technology consultancy in Brisbane that also provides a co-working and makerspace. And the work we do with our members ranges from full service implementation to just providing a roof and some tools and letting people go for it. So if you're in Brisbane and that's interesting, we're also the monthly venue for the Brisbane Internet of Things meetup event, which we call Sunday Mad Science, which is an open lab afternoon where you can bring your problems and projects and broken tech and explore solutions with your peers. And the project I'm going to talk about today is one of those things that just arose from sitting around at the Mad Science meetup and shooting the breeze. So naturally, an environment like Accelerando involves a fair bit of multitasking. And multitasking is something at which I am quite well known to be 100% absolutely and undeniably shit awful. Look, I've occasionally been known to go looking for a screwdriver, find the exact one I need, and then spend the next hour wondering where did I put the screw that was in my hand a minute ago. Actually, I'm bullshitting a bit there. It's not occasional, it's constant. That happens all the time. And the current unpleasantness here in season 3 of 2020 seems to only make it worse. Now, cognitive challenges can be addressed in a number of ways. There's psychiatric therapy and learning coping techniques, which I like to think of debugging for your meatware. Pharmacological treatments are quite popular, and I reckon this is basically overclocking. But today I want to tell you about prosthetics, technology for improved multitasking. My friend here in Brisbane, Monica Bradley, often says that she wishes she could have an operating system for her life, and that's something that I can really get behind. So I chose to look at this problem sort of systematically. Well, not really. What I actually did was read a lot of science fiction and watched a heap of movies. On the left here is what comics and movies and novels dangle before us. 3D holograms that obey our tactile and spoken commands. On the right is the absolute cutting edge of wearable technology as of 1990. I so envied these guys back in the day. I wanted to be them. So, firstly, I want to look at what parts of the sci-fi future we've already got, what tech is just around the corner, and what currently imaginary tech might be in the pipeline. Then I'm going to go piece by piece through what someone on a modest budget, that is not Tony Stark, might be able to assemble today. We'll start with a computer, which is somewhere where we're actually swamped for choice. Screens, not so much. There's good and there's cheap, and there's very little intersection, and there's very little compromise. Cameras have been a real surprise. There's an incredibly visceral do not want reaction from almost everyone to the idea of head-mounted cameras. And finally, the bits that motivated me are cognitive aids and wearable instrumentation. That is the possibility to augment our data acquisition and multitasking ability, or the lack of it, with technology. Some people use the word pre-disabled with varying degrees of seriousness to describe those lucky people who have no physical or cognitive challenges yet. The intent of that term is to highlight that assistive technology is not a niche market. We are all going to need something sooner or later. Spectacles are mainstream, hearing aids are more common than you'd think, wheelchairs and mobility scooters are not uncommon, but we suck at accommodating them. So here's what I want for assistive technology, what the market delivers, and what I think is the next level. When I first got my GSM phone in the 1990s, I read that it had something known as short messaging service, where you could send a brief textual message to another phone. But back then it didn't even work in Australia because the telephone companies hadn't bothered to bring such an obscure and useless feature to market. Only text messages turned out to be a killer app. Pages and phone booths and voice messages went extinct pretty much immediately once people worked out how much more convenient a quick text message was. And you might have forgotten that Twitter started as a mobile phone service for messaging a group of your friends about what you're up to and where you are. And then the tail abandoned the dog and we got a whole new social paradigm. Now these text messages are coming to our smartphone screens or to our smartwatches. And to be honest, that's pretty freaking cool. That was everything I wanted in the 1990s from always connected network technology. A smartphone gives me probably 2/3 of my assistive tech utopia, and I do think that in 5 years or so, smartphones might get us nearly all the way there. Right now, we all use our phones as torches or magnifying glasses and as barcode scanners to get into every damn shop that we go to, etc. And this is really handy, but it's also a handicap in that one of your hands is always consumed in holding the phone. Now, I'm getting older, and I've been warned that my arthritic hips and knees are going to give out on me someday soon, so I'm also thinking about how to save on movement. I want to have my appliances and machines stop demanding my physical presence so much and be able to interact with them from a distance. And since we're all embracing remote working right now, I think this is something that is only going to require wider attention. Now, if you've met me in real life, there's a good chance I forgot your name within 10 seconds. And please don't think it's because I don't care, but for an introvert like me, meeting someone new is a heck of a cognitive load. Memorizing a face, doing the right bow or elbow bump, or heaven forbid a handshake, smiling and thinking of something to say, parsing what that person said, it's a huge CPU spike. And it seems that in my case, the background process that moves important information from short-term memory to long-term just glitches out for a moment. If I hear the name again, I'm good, because after that initial processing spike, everything works okay. So sometimes I wish I could just rerun the last 20 seconds of audio. Even subtitles would be a bonus too, in order to catch something that I missed or that I failed to record during a moment of cognitive embarrassment. Now, recording data is another place where our phones are both great and awful. I bet you've got a photo roll full of cat pictures and shopping receipts and whiteboards. And phone cameras are a fabulous way to record little snippets of information, but they're a terrible way to then process that information, to return to it, to find it again. And task switching is another area where I'd love to have mechanical help. If I'm working on 3 things at once and I jump from one task to another, how can I use technology to help me get back to the previous task or even remember what it was? And the last thing I'm wishing for is extra sensors. The ability, as the previous speaker mentioned, to see in radar, to perhaps see temperature, to see electricity. How can I replace a bunch of sensor devices that I might normally carry around throughout the course of a day with something that is always in my body? So I mentioned that I drew inspiration from science fiction and futurism, and I want to call out some of the milestones in that process. Early 1980s, Robocop. Apparently he runs MS-DOS, not something I'd recommend, but that idea of information overlaid on a visual field is something that we've all found compelling, and I think the market has had a few terribly unfortunate stabs at. Robocop 2 apparently ran MacOS, which I can get behind. This is from Terminator 2, again, the concept of visual overlay, and nearly 30 years later we're all still talking about Minority Report, the idea of interacting tactilely with virtual information. Now, there's one series of books that I've been reading recently that I want to particularly call out, and this is the series known as the Murderbot Diaries, and this is about an enslaved cyborg who breaks themselves free from their masters, and one of the interesting concepts is of autonomous sensor drones, which go away and look at things and allow you to visualize the physical orientation of stuff when you're not physically there. And that's something that I'm going to come back to when I get a little bit more into the detail. So that's the setup. That's what I want to do and why I want to do it, and some of the people who inspired me to try. So let's talk about how do you do that if you're not Mark Zuckerberg or Tony Stark. Now, I mentioned that computing is an area in which we are pretty well served. Everybody used to point to the Raspberry Pi Zero as the great cheap unit of compute. And until a few months ago, I would have screamed, no, do not powerful enough. The thing I've been using is a gadget called the Banana Pi Zero, which has a quad-core processor, Bluetooth, USB. But just recently it was leapfrogged by the new Raspberry Pi Zero 2, so I withdraw my objection to Raspberry Pi, and I can tell you that if you were going to start with a project like this today, something like that Raspberry Pi Zero Model 2 is a great choice. But the one thing that all of those, what I call zero-class boards, suffer from is they've only got 512 megabytes of memory only, and that's pushing it to run a web browser or even a graphical environment. So I'm going to drop some hints later about how to do things without the baggage of browsers and even display managers. The Raspberry Pi 4 has got 8 gig of RAM, and it's good, but it's a bit too big to go implanting in your body, I would think. And there's also a thing called the Raspberry Pi Compute Module, which is essentially the Raspberry Pi without all the ports. And in our case, we don't want too many of the ports, but HDMI is the one that I can't escape at the moment. And so I wish there was some way to either have a MagSafe HDMI or to have a wireless HDMI, but we're not quite there. There's continuing rumors about Apple coming up with some kind of wireless head-mounted display, and I'm super excited to see that come to market. But right now, unfortunately, the video choices, which I'll go into a bit later, are just not great at the low end. Operating system wise, if you're running a Raspberry Pi, use the Raspberry Pi OS. If you're running anything that is a single board computer that's not a Raspberry Pi, you're probably going to want Armbian, which is a fabulous community supported distribution for all the ARM single boards out there that aren't Raspberry Pi. Armbian comes in either Debian or Ubuntu flavors. You can now get vanilla Ubuntu straight on your Raspberry Pi 4, I'd really advise not doing that unless there's something you can't live without, because there's just too much stuff running on a standard Ubuntu system for you to get the battery life and the thermal behavior that you're going to need. So powering a wrist or an arm-mounted computer, the power bank industry has done us a solid there, in that you can buy a little circuit board that's no wider than your battery, that takes care of all your charging. Tells you your charge level, gives you a nice solid 5 volts, and you can just plug a USB cable in to charge it. So this is what I'm using at the moment for my systems: a battery that is essentially a phone battery that has its own short circuit protection, and a little power bank board which gives me 5 volts. Now screen-wise, there's Google Glass was all the thing a couple of years ago. It cost $3,000. It had this camera attached to it that everybody freaked out about, and then it kind of fell off the public consciousness. Now it's still for sale, with some restrictions in what's called an enterprise version. And Microsoft has this fabulous piece of technology called HoloLens, which is bigger than I like. It's gorgeous to wear. It looks absolutely incredible from the inside. But I don't want to carry something that big. I need to be able to wear safety glasses or welding goggles or what have you from time to time, and not necessarily want to take something else off. And so the least awful solution that I've found so far is this little gadget from a company called Vufine, which costs about $200 US, so around about 300 Australian. And what it will do is it comes with a pair of fake spectacles if you're not already encumbered with them, and if you are, then it can strap to the arm of your spectacles, and it essentially gives you something that looks not unlike a kind of poor 14-inch CRT monitor floating in your visual field. And it's intended just to go right in the middle of one of your eyes, but I've found that it also works quite well just sitting above your view line, so you can still see forwards with both eyes, but if you glance up you can see your screen. And that's a real winner for me, is to have something that is there all the time, but it's not obscuring your face too badly, and you can access it without having to do anything with your hands. Now, cameras, I've mentioned, are a real turn off for a lot of people. I used to have a little Bluetooth locator that just stuck to the side of my glasses, and all it did was it beeped if I lost my spectacles, because I have a couple of pairs, I switch between them and I always lose them. And anytime anybody noticed it, they would always say the same thing. They'd say, "That's not a camera, is it?" It's a real point of terror for people, for someone to have a camera on their head, and I don't think there's any way around that. But what I'm going to do is put the camera on your hand, because what I want it for is those instances where I've got some tiny little circuit board and I need to read the serial number off of the chip, or I want a bit of light down a dark hole. So my approaches here are to use either the camera module out of a laptop computer, so little circuit board, talks over USB, or an endoscope camera. And these endoscope cameras, they have terrible resolution. They're only about 4 frames a second, but they're essentially focus free, which means, yeah, they'll register a room, they'll register the writing on an integrated circuit just as happily, and they've got built-in lights. So this is my current go-to for I need some augmented vision. The other thing which is really handy is Wi-Fi cameras. There's a number of models in the market, and I use these around my home where they're either permanently installed. There's one in the laundry which has a view of the washing machine, so we can tell, is it finished, is it loaded, is it unloaded. And I have some others which, there's one here in the office which looks into reception to tell me if there's anybody there, and I have some that are battery powered that I can just magnet on. So if I'm working with a machine that's doing a job and I want to know it's finished, I might have a bandsaw that's going to take 20 minutes to saw a 10 centimeter wide steel bar in half. I can set up a camera overlooking the saw and be able to just switch tasks and occasionally check in on a camera to see how that task is going. Now, the way that I do this on a limited compute device like one of the Zero boards is I use GStreamer and the frame buffer output, so I can essentially pop up as 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 video windows on my little virtual monitor that overlay whatever other information is being shown. And the other thing that I use all the time is a frame buffer PDF viewer, because my other killer app for head-mounted displays is being able to read documentation. So if I'm working on a circuit board, or I'm working on a car, I might have, or an appliance, I might have the service manual in digital form, or the data sheet in digital form, and I can throw that up on screen. Again, it's a much more resource appropriate way of viewing a PDF than doing it in a web browser. Keyboard wise, I love various little miniature keyboards which are intended for use with smart TVs. I use one which has a keyboard on one side and a gravity mouse on the other side, so I can flip it over and just incline my arm, and that provides me with spatial input, or I can type some commands on the little keyboard gadget. And the way I'm currently operating this is I have it attached to my armband computer with magnets, as we say. Now, one of the things I bought while I was exploring this whole process is an offshoot of the Google Cardboard VR, where you plug your mobile phone into a box and it gives you a head-up display. Now, these work quite well, but they're not they don't give you through vision. So if you're in a virtual space, that's great. If you're in a physical space where you need overlay, not so good. But they come with this nifty little joystick, which is just a Bluetooth device. And for the $20 that this gadget cost, that little joystick itself is worth the money. Now let's talk about cognitive aids. So I like to have a stack of tasks that I'm doing, and the mobile phone equivalent is you take a photo of whatever you were last working on when you switch tasks, so you know where you're up to when you go back. And so what I have worked on is coming up with a macro button on my keyboard which does the same thing. So I can go, okay, I was here, give me a photo, give me a 5-second voice note, and now I'm going to switch tasks. And the other thing that I'm working with, which is kind of unrelated to this project, but it's part of my idea, which is just a little flashing LED. And in this case, you can now buy LEDs that have all the flashing circuitry built in. So this is literally just a lithium battery and an LED and maybe a switch. And I have about 6 colors of these. And if I'm interrupted from a task, I turn one on or drop it where I was, I go away. And when I'm uninterrupted, I turn around and I look for the flashing light. Okay, that's what I was doing last. And as someone who is professionally frazzled, this is something that is really helping me to get that under control. Now, instrumentation, as an evil robot engineer, I'm often carrying a multimeter around, or a digital storage oscilloscope, or even working with blowtorches or other nasty tools. So what I'd love to be able to measure with my fingertips is, for one, voltages. Is this thing powered up? For two, temperature. Is that thing still 200 degrees, or can I pick it up yet? So how do we do this without ending up carrying too much stuff, or without ending up breaking wires? And just in the last 6 months or so, it seems that magnetic connections have gone from really hard to find to absolutely dirt cheap and available in whatever you want. So when you've got I2C sensors that need 4 wires, 50 cents will get you a pair of 4-pin magnetic connectors, which allow you to swap sensors in or out off of your wearable computing. And another possibility is Bluetooth. I've designed a couple of really small, low-cost Bluetooth boards into which you can plug whichever sensor you want, and you've basically got a little matchbox-sized puck that can be a temperature sensor or a voltage sensor or whatever you. And they broadcast their identity and values via Bluetooth Low Energy. So I have an app on my gadget which just says, hey, what sensors are around me? What are they currently saying? And so I can turn a gadget on, drop it into position near a job, and have that input streaming to my device. So let's look now at what this all actually looks like in its current prototype state. So here we have a chunk of EVA foam, the cosplayer's go-to material, into which we have sewn a battery and a power supply board and in this case, Banana Pi Zero, and we've got our keyboard / mouse magnetically affixed to that, and we've got our head-mounted display. And here it is in its hilarious physicality, and I think I would probably fit right in with those heroes of mine from the 1990s if you've been to him back there and perhaps spotted me a leather jacket. Now, I'm not sure that I would say to you go out and build one of these right now, because I'm starting to think that maybe the arm isn't the right place. There's a YouTuber who's doing great stuff named Odd J, and he's built himself a little shoulder-mounted companion pet, which does tricks for him. And I'm really starting to think that either, say, the back of the head or on your shoulder or the upper arm is a place to put something perhaps a little bit bigger, a Raspberry Pi sized computer that can use those magnetic fixtures to connect to sensors that are down at your wrist level. So that's a whirlwind tour of where I'm at in wearable sensing and data acquisition. Head-mounted cameras, unfortunately, they're just poison. Finger-mounted cameras, however, I think are a huge win. Gravity and accelerometers is a fascinating input device. Head-mounted displays, right now, that vufine device is 4 years old and there's still nothing that touches it on the market. I'm really interested to see what Apple and Samsung come up with their rumored products. And there's an old saying that a computer is a machine to help you think, and that can be whatever it means for you. Whatever you struggle to stay on top of is what your computer ought to be doing. We have a saying here at Accelerando, we get computers to worry about things so that you don't have to. And I hope that you can find computers to worry about your anxieties also. And with us being here in season 3 of 2020, I think remote sensing and remote monitoring is something that we all would like to be doing more of. So that's what I have for you. Thank you for your attention. And I think we're probably running a bit short on time, but happy to take questions, etc.
Oh, great. Thank you very much, Christopher. Yeah, there are a couple of questions. We are slightly over time, but questions are good. And the audience always have good things to ask about. One of the questions is, which AR glasses should I keep an eye on as a wheelchair user who has been waiting for these for 10 plus years?
There is another product which I'm struggling to remember the name of that's a little bit higher up the budget tree. My friend Pat Catanzariti, who you'll find is at PatCat on Twitter, wrote an article last year which is the top 10 AR displays on the market. So if you go and search for his article, that's probably the best answer I can give at the moment.
Okay.
All of those products, unfortunately, were in the $1,000 price range. This vufine one is the only one I found that's sort of under 500.
Yep. Another suggestion was, this is going back to the start of the presentation, you were talking about little SBC, single board computers. Someone said, have you seen the Radsha, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Radsha Zero, which is a quad A53, 4 gigabytes of memory, and a Pi Zero form factor?
No, but that sounds fabulous. Memory,
okay.
My goodness.
So that's something to check out. And the final question is, are you worried about the resistance and signal integrity with those magnetic connectors?
Not so much, particularly using I2C. There are some booster chips that are things that are called active terminators. I don't know how familiar the audience is with I2C, but it's what's called an open collector mechanism. So rather than driving a high signal and a low signal, you've got a resistor which gives you a sort of weak pull-up to your high voltage, and you drive a 0 for the low voltage. And that means that you can have multiple things connected on a bus really easily, but it also does mean that it is pretty poor over long distances. But just recently, there's some chips that you can get which intelligently slam the bus up and down for you to give you more range and more speed. So yeah, we're actually finding that we can go further with those cables than previously.
Very good. Okay. Well, we had better stop now because we've got only a few minutes until our next presentation. So thank you, Christopher. That was fascinating. Everybody else, we've got about a 5-minute break, and then we'll be back with the next presentation.